And here we go. Hi. Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Freeman from ALA Publishing, and we are happy to have you here for this month's edition of AL Live, Library Learning Goes Online. We have a fantastic panel here today, and they're not all here yet, so so bear with us. But I want to start by introducing our moderator, Heather Moorfield-Lang. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here again, Dan.
Glad to have you here. And Heather is a professor of library and information science at the University of South Carolina. She was formerly the Education and Applied Social Sciences librarian at Virginia Tech.
And interestingly, I'm here today at Virginia Tech.
That's right. Yeah, a big chunk of our panel, as you see, is at Virginia Tech today. Forrest Foster should be joining us soon. I will preemptively introduce Forrest. He's the Access Services and Information Commons Coordinator at the Winston-Salem State University in North Carolina. He's been having some trouble getting in, but he should be joining us soon. Next, I want to introduce Rebecca K. Miller. Welcome, Rebecca.
Hello.
And Rebecca.
So sorry, my name isn't down there.
And Rebecca's the Assistant Director of Learning Services at Virginia Tech. Next, I want to introduce Lauren Presley. Welcome, Lauren.
Hello. I'm so happy to be here.
Happy to have you here, and Lauren is the Director for Learning Environments at Virginia Tech. Her and Rebecca are right next door to each other, which actually came in handy today as we were getting ready. And finally, I want to introduce Paul Signorelli. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad to be here and hope I stay in long enough to say something.
And Paul is a writer, trainer, instructional designer, social media strategist, and a consultant, and he's formerly the director of training at the San Francisco Public Library. So with that, Heather, I'll turn it over to you so you can get started.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dan. So today we're going to be talking about library learning going online, and many of us have experience with online learning ourselves. Quite a few of us, of course, had experience with learning online, taking our classes online, but we are hoping to talk today about we in libraries and with our experiences of instruction, teaching, and learning online, and how we in libraries are able to work online, instruct online, how we can provide services for instruction and education online, and all different aspects therein. So there's a lot of different angles and aspects to this. It's incredibly interesting. It's been fascinating how it's been going over the last few years and how everything's been working over the last few years. Yeah, you're going to hear a little bit of an echo from me because I'm in an echoey chamber. For that, I do apologize. And so there is going to be some interesting topics, especially when you're thinking about how much this has changed and what we have to work with over the past 5 years, and how everything and where it's all going in the future. So I'm not going to talk about everything that I've been doing, of course, because I want to turn it over to our panelists. So I'm going to go ahead and get started and asking them some questions. So first I would like to direct a question. I'm going to start with Paul. So the first question is going to be, what is your experience with online learning in libraries? And as I said, I will start with Paul with this question.
Thanks, Heather. I actually started with online learning as a big skeptic about 7 or 8 years ago when I was working at San Francisco Public Library. There was an effort there to try to take things online, and I just didn't feel our staff was ready for it yet. Now I'm on the other side of things, having been involved in it as a learner, actually got a degree online through the University of North Texas, do a lot of webinars and a lot of other coursework through ALA Editions and others, and I've come full circle on this. I think it's a very dynamic part of our learning landscape, and I'm glad to be part of it.
Thank you. So Rebecca, I direct the question to you. What is your experience with online learning in libraries?
Thanks, Heather. Actually, online learning and I go way back. No, my very first big girl job, real professional job in a library, which I started 10 years ago this month, I realized, was working as an e-reserves coordinator at the University of North Carolina at the Health Sciences Library. So from the very beginning of my professional career, I've really been thinking about, how to make things accessible to people, thinking about the user experience, thinking about the learner experience. Aside from working at Virginia Tech, I've also worked at Louisiana State University, and in both places I've taught for-credit online classes and also developed materials that could be integrated into other learning types of experiences and that sort of thing. So it's actually at the point where I almost don't really think about online learning as a separate thing. It's just part of learning. It's part of the portfolio of learning that we all deal with. So that, in a nutshell, is my experience.
I agree. She's very right. You know, I mean, at this point, because, see, here at Virginia Tech, we have 5 different locations, and I work for the University of South Carolina. We have definitely more than one, and actually multiple locations, so it's no longer just the brick and mortar building of where we're teaching. It's all over. We have to take it online. But now I move to Lauren. Lauren, what is your experience with online learning in libraries?
All right. So I, like Rebecca, have been involved with Welcome, Forrest.
Here.
So I've been working with online learning for some time. My first library position was at Wake Forest University, and I spent about a decade there. And that campus was very focused on the face-to-face traditional instruction. But even so, we were interested in how to do that more effectively. How could we do it in ways that were more engaging for our students? Were there things that we could take advantage of that were emerging that hadn't been there before? So even in this very traditional environment, I was doing a lot of work around incorporating ideas from online learning into a traditional sort of portfolio of services, and culminated that at Wake Forest with teaching the first online undergraduate credit-bearing course, which was exciting because there was some skepticism about could we do that in a way that was appropriate to that institution, and making use of all the various technologies and tools out there. We were able to do something that was really sort of capture that face-to-face personal relationship, but in an online way. At Virginia Tech, I'm working with Rebecca on a lot of the types of things she was describing, but we're also working on building an online learning unit to help us really build up that program and think more strategically about how to approach it and how to create, really with an eye towards universal design, things that would work for online learning as well as face-to-face, as well as point of need, as well as at service desks. So how to infuse everything with an online learning approach.
Thank you. And you will notice that we have had a new person join us. This is Forrest Foster from Winston-Salem State. And Forrest, I'm going to jump right in. We've already introduced you. And so I'm going to direct the question to you. What is your experience with online learning in libraries?
Well, thank you for having me. My name is Raymond, by the way. I guess starting out as a student at East Carolina University, I guess my first experience was I guess from a learning standpoint. I guess back then, I guess around, I don't want to date myself, but I guess 99, 2000, 2001, they weren't really talking about online. It was more like satellite, you know, distance, and that was like my first encounter with satellite. They had to, I was taking classes through North Carolina Central to get my master's, and the word satellite was thrown around, so that was like the new buzzword, and they had to make sure that the degrees of the satellite was just right in order to get that incoming signal so we could have that face-to-face class. So that was really my first encounter, but I mean, ever since then, I've used it a lot. I've been embedded in classes. We've done a lot of different types of flipped and different methodologies with embedded. Although I'm not the distance ed and embedded person here, there is some good and bad in it, and I'm sure we'll get into that a little later. But just a whole host of things. We've even do podcast here. Not so much, directly one-on-one with students, even though I indirectly would help the students, but more so with faculty and sharing information. We have a Learning Commons podcast here where we share, distribute, disseminate information, just to share knowledge of practitioners, what they're doing, get experts in. So just a whole host of gamut of things, and I hope we can continue that in the discussion a little later.
Sure. Forrest has a blog radio podcast that I have had the privilege to take part in, and it is a great tool and resource for information commons and libraries, and I know he'll be talking about that later. Just to answer the question myself very briefly, I've been involved with online learning in some way, shape, or form since 2006 when I was an adjunct at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. Coming here to Virginia Tech, I was the education librarian, and since we had 5 off-campus locations, I wanted to be able to deliver information and resources to all campuses, and so that's when I really started delving into how to deliver instruction across multiple campuses. And now that I work at the University of South Carolina, everything I teach is online. So now I'm moving towards how can I best teach online, and also how can I teach everyone that's in my classes in the best manner. So now I'm moving to areas such as ADA compliance and closed captioning and transcribing, and how can I make sure that everything that I deliver is accessible across all formats and all devices, and what's the best way to deliver my videos. And so I'm looking at all different types of angles and things like that. So I will move to the next question, and I will direct it to Lauren first, so that no one's surprised. So Lauren, what is the status of online learning or instruction in your library setting?
So this is something that Rebecca and I might need to tag team on, since we're at the same
That
place.
is fine.
All right, and we work closely together. So maybe to frame this a little bit, for those of you listening along, we are part of the same division, the learning division for the library. My area is called learning environments, and that includes, I sort of think of it as situated learning. So learning that happens in the building, learning that happens online, but creating the environment and infrastructure or platform to allow that to happen. Rebecca works closely with the learning, she manages the learning services side, which is the side that does a lot of instruction or helps people in the building who teach.
Right. I would say that group is really more of what you would think of as a traditional sort of instruction group. So we do a lot of actual teaching and strategize around like what programmatic outcomes we should be thinking about and that sort of thing. So it really is sort of an artificial separation between the environments and the services, but it works well because our teams work so well together.
Yeah. And we collaborate a lot, so I hesitate to claim this answer, but one of the things, maybe I'll start with the infrastructure piece, and Rebecca, you can build on with some of the specifics. Great. So one of the things that we're doing is we're sort of later adopters to the SpringShare platform, so we're working with LibGuides and doing some work there. We're also hiring right now an online learning librarian as well as a web developer for the learning unit so that we can create a platform for instructional content and learning objects and other things. My dream state is that we'll be able to create essentially a repository of teaching tools that we can then plug into LibGuides. If you get a chat at the desk, you could answer with a video that shows someone how to do the thing they're asking. But basically create a place that we can put all that content and then reuse it in a really, really easy and streamlined sort of way. So Rebecca, do you want to build on that?
Yeah, definitely. I think you did a great job of describing sort of the infrastructure pieces of what our vision is for how we're going to put some of those online learning opportunities together. But what my group has been thinking about is what sort of teaching opportunities might go in those repositories and what it might look like. And one of the things we have had a lot of conversations surrounding here at Virginia Tech, and I've had with a lot of colleagues at other schools as well, is that because of the proliferation of online learning opportunities and really communication in general, the skills that students or learners need to be able to succeed successfully in the world are changing. So those are the types of things that we're really looking at as we build learning opportunities. For example, the strategic plan at Virginia Tech, and I'm going to have to look to my notes to make sure I don't misquote this, the strategic plan states that students need to be able to interact meaningfully with technology, and we believe that using it to facilitate learning is a huge piece of that. So that's really a lot of the why we're building these new infrastructures and sort of rethinking what we're doing, and also the how we're going to be doing it, what we're going to be filling it with, and really thinking critically about what those information skills are the students are going to need. For example, we see people turning to YouTube and Khan Academy and things like that. We want students to be able to understand how to use these tools in order to build their own learning networks. In addition to supplementing, of course, the critical things that they're learning while they're here at Virginia Tech before they go off to be good citizens out in the world.
Thank you. So, Forrest, I'll direct the question to you. What is the status of online learning or instruction in your library settings?
It's progressing. I think everybody's getting some type of hesitation from faculty, of course, which is the norm. Of course, change is always hesitant with change, but I think we're moving in the right direction. If you look at traditionally how we've handled instruction, it was usually a one-shot, 4 or 5 years ago. Then it's moved on to something else. Now we're trying to get there to get online. And, we're a small university, state university, about 5,000 FTE. So, we try to find our place in the sun, as some people say. But I think, as Ms. Miller stated, it's all about the strategic plan. We've, like I said before, we've come from traditionally doing one-shots to having a general ed outcome in information literacy now, which is awesome because we're getting away from credit-based and it's about competency-based. And luckily, we made a presentation. We did some formal things to make information literacy, or what you could call information fluency, whatever you want to call it now. A general ed outcome, along with some other outcomes, scientific literacy and so forth. But the things that stem from that, though, is some of that online learning in regards to, we do an OK Scholars program to invite faculty in to showcase different resources, technologies, and the ability to do some online learning. So I think it's helped over the years. It's grown. I think it's in the right direction. We'll see what happens with that.
Great, thank you. And Paul, I direct the question to you.
Thanks. I want to build off what Rebecca and Forrest or Raymond. Sorry, I'm not sure how to address you at this point directly. Are you going by Ray or Raymond?
Hey, you got to have certain identities. You got to keep it going, man.
I like that. You, yes, you. Anyway, whoever you are.
Forrest, but Raymond in this.
Yeah.
There was a brilliant underpinning to this that I think we really need to be paying more attention to in libraries and elsewhere, and that's the idea, as Rebecca was saying, that the skills are changing in online learning. I think particularly that goes for the learners. There is really a need for our learners to learn how to engage in effective ways online. I'm seeing a lot of reports, a lot of research done on this, showing that the reason people drop out of online learning or drop out of MOOCs is they're overwhelmed. When I play in the area of connectivist MOOCs, where learners are learning by collaborating and producing learning objects together, I think that's dynamic, and I think we need to help our learners to rise to that. It can be messy and confusing at first, and if some of our library colleagues are still skeptical about online learning, it's because perhaps we're not doing all we can be doing to make it less messy and more appealing to them and easier for them to jump in there. So that's something I think maybe we're not seeing enough of, but that we should be paying attention to.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So, Rebecca, I will direct this one to you first. How has online learning in libraries changed, in your opinion, over the last 3 years?
This is actually great because it follows right up with what I think Paul was just talking about a little bit.
Well, I tried to segue,
Good job, good job. I think that what I personally have seen and what I've personally been paying a lot of attention to is becoming more learner-focused. We're becoming more focused on what success looks like for the learner, helping the learner think through what that might look like as well. I have to pull in here the discussion of the new framework for information literacy. One of the big pieces of that is metacognition and learners being aware of how they're learning and what strategies might work for them. And this is one of the things that I really see being integrated, again, here at Virginia Tech and other places as well, is that we're thinking about that as we're building these online learning objects. We're thinking about how we can help direct the learner's attention to how they're learning, what they're learning, why they're learning, that awareness piece right there, which of course is a skill that they're going to be able to take into learning for the rest of their lives, whether it's related to a certain curriculum, like at university, or the type of learning that we do throughout the rest of our lives. I think in a nutshell, that pretty much sums it up. If I think of anything else, I'll jump back in.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, Raymond, I direct the question to you. How have you seen online learning changing over the past 3 years?
Oh, well, I mean, as Ms. Miller talked about earlier, I totally agree with her. But I don't know. As I said before, I mentioned to somebody today, I think it really goes back to I know the end result is the learner, but I think it starts with the teacher. I think it really goes back to the training and the necessity and tools that it takes to understand different modules and technologies and the outcomes and learning paradigms and methodologies that one needs to understand what goes into an online class. I think that traditional teaching in regards to the simple and fundamentals of teaching still coincides with online teaching. I don't think that should change anything, but I think we get caught up in a lot of these new exercises and new ideas and new ways to engage people. But I think the fundamental is still should be the same. So of course I think the technology will always change. There will always be alternatives to teaching and learning, but I think still we still need to focus on the traditional teaching aspect and make sure that faculty are on board, and that's kind of our place in the summit, is to help them with that, to be that kind of conduit to help them along for the future journey.
And actually, can I jump in here real quickly? Because Forrest just said something that I remembered I wanted to say.
Please do.
When I started really critically thinking about teaching online, particularly with the first class I ever taught online at LSU, I found that it really helped enhance the type of teaching that I did face-to-face as well, because I had to think so much more deeply about what I was doing and why I was doing it. So I completely agree with Forrest/Raymond, whatever we're going to call him.
Y'all are going to kill me, aren't you? You're going to kill me for the rest of the time.
But I agree with him that I think what we think of as traditional teaching is extremely related to what we're talking about with online learning. And I always found that relationship between the two that I do really helpful.
Thank you. Paul, I direct the question to you.
Ditto to just about everything that's been said, even though there's a lot of contradictions there. Learner-centric is something that I think is really important, and that's where I focus a lot of my attention. I think a sense of playfulness is also important. What I've been seeing over the last few years in the areas that most intrigue me are those areas where the learners and the learning facilitators interact at levels where the roles are not so clear-cut anymore, in a really good setting where people are prepared a little bit in advance, perhaps through a flipped classroom model where you come into the classroom ready, whether it's online or face-to-face, you come in ready to do something. This is creating wonderful opportunities for us to continue to learn together. And on the fringes of this, again, going back to what I'm seeing in connectivist MOOCs, learning communities will form within a class that's supposed to last a month or a couple of months. But when it's over, there's almost a rebellion from the learners themselves saying, hey, it's not over. It's over when I say it's over. I've seen Michael Stevens have wonderful success with his hyperlinked library MOOC. He just said that they had a one-year reunion after the course ended in December, and I've seen the same thing in one of my favorite learning communities. We just had a 2-year reunion, although the course formally ended in March of 2013. That is a much different way of learning, and I think online is stimulating it, but it's not limited to that. It's a really nice movement for all of us, and I encourage us to keep exploring that to see what it does for us.
Sure. And Lauren?
Yeah, I think I agree, again, with my fellow panelists, but one of the things that I've been thinking about as we've had this conversation is about how in the field, one of the evolutions in the last 3 years is that I think we've evolved a little bit from thinking it's a thing that's distinct and unto itself to being just another part of doing business. And that's not true equally everywhere. But I remember when I first got in the field and went to ALA and I sat in a distance learning interest group meeting in like 2003, it was very much about like how do you register students, how do you like do the legal stuff to get them resources. And now if you sit in those meetings, it's much more about how do we do this well, and it's less administrative and more about the learning process. So I think that like part of the evolution is that. And I think that part of the evolution, too, is student expectations, which is related to the thing that Rebecca and I have talked about students looking online to find content. Like, that has been true probably for, nearly 2 decades. But people have an expectation now that they should be able to find what they need when they need it. And they have an expectation that it'll be short, snappy, and fun, right? So, like, the expectations are shifting, and we have to continue to shift them with those as they change. And they'll, that's one of the fun things. They'll continue to change. We just have to pay attention to how they're evolving.
I completely agree. My background's in curriculum and instruction, so I mean, I'm continuously looking now towards, it's not, as you said, the fundamentals or the mechanics. It's how to best deliver this instruction, whether it's face-to-face or online, and then, and then I do a lot with online technologies, so which ones are going to best serve in a good format, and then, of course, which ones are now going to be accessible. There are schools that have a rubric called Quality Matters, and so with this Quality Matters rubrics, as we're checking items off, accessibility and ADA compliance is now becoming a strong part of that. And so how can we best serve everyone across those across that area? But just making it good and fun and easy, and how can you best lay everything out so that things are easy to find within Blackboard or WebEx, or if that's how you're delivering, or if you're using Moodle or Sakai, or there's a list, whichever ones you might be using. There's all different new classroom performance systems that are coming out that we're looking at, and however you're planning on setting it up, regardless of the tool, it still boils down to how we can best deliver that instruction and service to our students, our clients, our patrons.
And I just want to interject right quick. I think it really depends on where you are, how that happens. We've talked about fundamentals, we've talked about delivery of service, but I think all that can be detrimental, or it could be on the descending order if you're not at a certain institution with a certain amount of funds, with a certain amount of infrastructure. You know, and I'm sure we're going to talk about mobile
As I
learning.
say, that's my very next question. Thanks.
Right. But you know, I mean, all that ties into infrastructure and,
Yes.
and finances and funding. So I mean, I think it kind of depends on where you are.
Yeah, and thank you for that segue, because my very next question, which I will direct to you, Raymond, is, I'll let you be first on this one. So what do you do when you're ahead or behind the infrastructure or the resources as a librarian or professional? And typically, you know, we're the ones on this panel, and many of us in librarianship, you know, we're the ones who are like, I want to do this, or I want to create this thing, or this webinar, or this podcast, or this, that, or the other. So what happens when you're ahead of the infrastructure or the resources or the desire or the drive or the initiative or whatever? How do you move forward when everyone's not ready to move with you?
Yeah, it's a tough one. That's a tough one. You know, you still want to be knowledgeable and still want to be conscientious of what's going on in your field, but however, you want to execute some of these things too, because you see other people doing them, but you can't do them. So again, it goes back to kind of resources and funding, but I've had maybe one or two situations like that, and I hate using this phrase because I think it's definitely cliche and it's played out, but evidently, depending on where you are, it might be still relevant. Doing more with less, you know. We've had a situation with, you know, we wanted to try, this is around when digital media literacy was getting big, probably 5-6 years ago. At least those terms were getting big. I think a lot of people have been doing projects, multimedia projects for a while now, but, you know, those terms were getting big around, you know, 4 or 5 years ago. And we were ready to try Final Cut Pro, you know, really pull it in full into action. You know, all these high-end softwares, Adobe and Premiere, and, you know, we got a lot of attention from faculty. However, you know, once we found out that, you know, that was not really needed, we kind of scaled it back to, okay, maybe we can get away with some of these low-end programs such as iMovie or Movie Maker, and still get in those digital literacies and those certain, you know, media literacies we're looking for. So every situation is different. I think that worked well for us at that time. Of course, now since we, you know, 5-6 years ago, we had a little more, you know, some grant opportunities. We were able to get some of those licenses, those high-end programs and softwares in, and we could do some of the things we wanted to do. But yeah, you just have to use with what you have. At that time, what was, I guess, hot was those free web tools, and we kind of maximized them, and that was kind of one of our situations.
Sure. Rebecca, what do you do when you're ahead of the, when your thoughts are ahead of the plan, but the infrastructure is not with you? I've been there with you. So what did you do?
That's true. Well, I think probably everyone who may be following along with us today may have been in that position, because more and more librarians, no matter what their position may be in their library, librarians are driving change and solving problems. And those are two big pieces of, I think, what the question is right here. And there are a number of other components involved in that, and I'm going to go back to what Forrest said as well, because I totally agree with him that it's all about your local community, understanding user needs, and understanding the culture. So when you're trying to drive change, trying to understand what your users may need, what they may expect, trying to get a sense of how what you're doing fits into the overall program or strategic plan for the university or the institution is huge. But if you've already established that need and you're really trying to push forward some projects and maybe help your colleagues develop some new skills or even change their mindsets a little bit, something that can be really fun, and Lauren and I talk about this actually pretty frequently, something that can be fun is to just pull people into low-stakes projects where they can sort of see firsthand what the benefits may be, or sort of build those skills while they're actually accomplishing something. So that's one way that I found to drive change in kind of a fun way and to bring others along with me.
Great. Lauren.
So this will sound sort of familiar, I think, in terms of the refrain, but I personally am a really big fan of evolutionary change, sort of bringing people along, understanding where people are and how to build on that, and figure out where you're going together. So as part of that, I think that you cannot overstate the importance of understanding the institutional values and cultures, both of the larger university as well as your individual library. And if you have a firm grounding in that, a firm grounding in the strategic plan, you kind of can understand where people are comfortable with pushing and where people might feel sort of sacred ground and not a safe place to be doing that. My very first attempt at bringing some of these ideas into a library was in rebooting a tutorial, and we had one of those tutorials that had been created in the late 90s that were state of the art at the time. I'm sure you remember them, where you read the wall of text, click next, read the wall of text. I mean, it was really great at the time. It had images with markup and all sorts of good stuff. But by the time I got there, it felt like an old web page, right? Mm-hmm. So I at that point had sort of within the scope of my job was recreating this, and that institution had such a strong face-to-face culture that they didn't mind what I did with that. So it was a safe place to do something radically different. So I was able to do something radically different. People were able to see that and see that there were some good things to it, and they heard good feedback from students, and that made them, a little more comfortable with the idea. And then when we did move to the point where people were creating online content, I intentionally set up a structure where we had sort of a lightweight script and some best practices that were really easy and justified sort of a, casual and not stressful approach. And we used Jing, which is relatively easy to use. Mm-hmm. And if someone didn't feel comfortable with that, I was happy to sit right next to them and push the buttons for them so they wouldn't have to. And that sort of brought people along and helped them see how they could contribute this type of content. And then when they used it as part of their class or their LibGuide or however they were using it, and they got good reactions from students, that encouraged them to do it more. So I think that sort of very, like Rebecca and I talk about, things that are fun and low stakes and skill building, this was all fun. They came by and I sat and pushed buttons, but we also chatted about how things were going. It was a fun thing. And in the end, we all were producing that type of content. It was just part of what we did. Sure. So I think that in general, understanding the institutional identity and values, using things that are free and easy to use, that makes it easy because people then don't have to request expensive software and then feel guilty about having to learn it, right? Mm-hmm. That type of thing allows people to sort of come along as well.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Paul?
Yes, like Laura and I very much, if I've got people that are resistant to something, like sitting with them and letting them see what something can do so they get excited about it. Mm-hmm. For example, if I'm working with learners who don't see the value of Twitter in learning, I'll invite them into a tweet chat and let them see how many people there are accessible to them through that tweet chat and the quality of the conversation that happens. If somebody's watching something like today's session and starting to feel like all we're doing is talking to them, I'll switch over to the feed for it and see that people like Heather Moorfield and Nicole Pivick are out there tweeting some of the session and turning this into a learning opportunity for themselves and extending the conversation. I think the more we do to let the learners themselves say, hey, I'm ready for this, or I didn't know that, I want to play more, the more we can do to facilitate that, the better off we are. And if it's a budget issue, then just go low budget. Mm-hmm. Nothing pleases me more when I face a challenge like this than to contact a colleague, either inside of or outside of libraries, and say, I'm facing this challenge. My learners are facing this. Have you faced it? What are you doing? And usually they have faced it. Usually they do have ideas. So it revolves around using communities of learning, personal learning networks, and all the other jargon that we kick around to make ourselves better, more responsive, and simply not give up because we face the kind of challenges that we know we're going to face. That's the gig. We don't get paid because this is easy. Yeah. We get paid because we're creative and we're helping other people to be creative and find solutions.
Thank you. So I'm going to move to some of the learning online and how it can also move into also our mobile and handheld devices, because mobile and handheld devices, I'm going to direct this to Lauren first, mobile and handheld devices are catching up with, and continuously we're working to bring our online learning to be able to work across all devices and handheld devices, but we're still working with that, and are the apps and across providers and across our different systems. So what are our thoughts on this? Mm-hmm. I've got my notes over here too. How are we making online learning mobile? And what are we thinking about this? Where are you guys looking at it here at Virginia Tech, and what have you seen in some of your MOOCs, online learning, anything that you've either done in your own teaching or instruction that you've taken part in? Lauren, I ask you first.
All right. So again, I think a lot of this comes down to institutional culture and what people are using on campus. And there's lots of ways to find that out. But I think understanding what the devices are that people are bringing, what devices are required to have, what they're using, what they choose to use in their free time, that all informs for me what I choose to put my content on, or how I choose to do it. For example, at Wake Forest, it's a laptop campus where everyone's given the same model laptop. So when you're teaching, you can assume, like you are able to assume, everyone has this device that has these capabilities. So when I taught online there, I was able to require, as part of class, at the end of each class, a little 30-second to 2-minute video of them synthesizing the content and explaining how it connects to their life. If I was doing that here, I'm not totally, well, here today I would, because most laptops have that feature, but at the time I wouldn't have been able to do that elsewhere because I wouldn't have known that there was a camera that they'd have access to. So I think that sort of understanding of what the technology requirements are for your campus or community helps you understand how to think about it. You can also use web analytics to get a lot of that content, so you can use that to figure out how are people hitting your website. I always get a little bit nervous about specifically designing apps for one platform because that gets expensive. I'm much more interested in developing web pages that can work across platforms and devices. I like responsive web design. But in some cases, you know, it might make sense. Like if you have a campus that's requiring Android tablets, then you know what you're working with.
Sure.
One thing that I do like that we're doing here specifically is we do have a tour for the library that is required by a lot of classes, and we have it on the iPad. And as part of that, we check out iPads to do it, which I really, really like that philosophically, because not everyone has an iPad or iPhone. And this is a way so that if you have it, that's fine. You can use your own device. It's, you know, easy. But if you don't, then you can just use one of ours, and it's not a big deal. You just check it out at CERC like you would check out anything from CERC. So I like the idea of, if we're requiring certain platforms, also circulating those platforms so that users can use them if you're doing sort of online enhanced learning on campus. But if it's off campus, I think it's really important to understand what the users are actually using and use that to drive how you're designing your instruction.
Sure. Paul, what do you think?
Yeah. Well, one of the conversations we had informally a couple days ago preparing for this was the idea of even defining mobile learning and formal versus informal learning. I think libraries and many other organizations are far ahead of where they think they are. If we define mobile learning, as we sat, as Lauren said, and designed to a specific platform or a specific tool, we're at one level. But if we acknowledge that our users are bringing things into the room, and bring your own device is a huge movement that even the New Media Consortium latest report that came out yesterday says is one of the big educational things. If we recognize people are using those devices as part of their learning, then we are far further down the road of mobile learning that we are acknowledging. And if we acknowledge that, it's a game changer. It allows us to be more flexible in how we deliver and how we run our virtual classrooms as well as our physical classrooms. It makes the conversation so much more dynamic and exciting. And I think that's a good thing for us too.
Thank you. Raymond?
Well, I like to use, I guess, not necessarily teaching, but I guess sharing information. I kind of talked about and spoke about a little earlier, but not so much teaching, but you know, in regards to our Learning Space show here, you know, it's, you know, you talk about breaking down specific devices and specific entities, but there's nothing that really hasn't changed about the internet. You still need, you know, the internet's still wholesome and still good. You know, we can get wrapped up in devices. So we kind of thought about, you know, just having a show built on the internet. And, you know, as long as you have connectivity, which is sometimes still an issue for certain individuals and certain groups, the internet still is kind of like a cast net to where, depending on whatever device you have, you still can probably get, you know, connectivity to the internet for the most part. But we've gone in the aspect of just, you know, doing an online show in regards to, you know, the Learning Space model, and we're sharing it, and you know, we share with iTunes and these different types of the formats. So there's a wide variety out there. Again, we've talked about, you all mentioned before, you know, just trying to find that right, you know, device and make sure everybody's on the right driver and everybody has this connected. And it's a lot of technical jargon out there, but for our show and the way we've kind of tied into the last question, you know, doing more with the less, and that kind of came from just, you know, why use a radio station? You know, why, you know, go down to the mass comm department or the university department and, you know, waste tons of thousands of dollars on personalities and equipment and electricity when we can do something straight online for free, you know? So tying those two questions in together. So, you know, there's, you know, iTunes is just pure internet and just, you know, doing with what you have. So, yeah.
I agree. Rebecca, sorry.
All right, well, I agree with what everyone else has said, but I'll particularly respond to what both Lauren and Paul said, and I'll start with Lauren's. One of the things I love about the example that she shared about our mobile tour is that it does require students to either use their own devices in a way that contributes to what they're learning here at the university, or it gives them the opportunity to use a mobile device when they may not have been able to use it before. And one of my big soapboxes that I often stand on and talk about when we talk about changes in learning, particularly related to changes in the skills that students need to succeed, is that mobile devices have changed the way that people communicate and the way that people access things. So I think that's something we need to be addressing. And I often talk about that in the classes I teach, both face-to-face and online. But to go back to the tour example, is it does give students the opportunity to play around with it and try that out. And I love that. Like, it enforces a particular learning outcome related to mobile devices, and I just love that. To respond to what Paul said, I also completely agree that I think mobile learning in particular has just completely taken off because it's enabled us to learn anywhere and everywhere and all the time. I think about myself as a learner in these situations, and I'm constantly connected to Twitter, I'm constantly connected to Facebook, I'm constantly connected to Instagram, and I've basically built what we call a personal learning network or a personal learning environment where I'm not part of any library school class anymore. I'm not really taking any workshop right now online through ALA or anything like that, but I'm constantly being updated on what's going on in the field, and I'm constantly being updated on the trends and being challenged to think about new things because I'm surrounded by these voices all the time of the people that are in my personal learning network. And our students are doing that too in some ways. And again, I think it's our responsibility as information literacy experts and their guides to help them, again, be aware of what's going on with that and to think about their learning networks in those ways.
Yeah.
Thank you. Paul wants. Well, Paul's going to add on, and then Raymond can add on. I'm sorry.
Yeah, this whole idea of the importance of mobile learning, somebody out in the audience, Rory, I think his name is DeLaz now, is tweeting some comments in, and he has a question that all of us are sort of dancing around. Wonderful. Okay, so from Rory, what if there was a native app solution that could integrate all of your library's resources and functionality on any mobile device? This is something we talk about at the New Media Consortium, the idea of something that's platform agnostic. And if and when we get to that holy grail of mobile learning, we're going to be in a fantastic world. But in the meantime, it's something we struggle with. There are so many different platforms, as Lauren already said. We have to acknowledge that as a challenge, but not an insurmountable challenge. And the closer we can pull people in, by doing sessions like we're doing today, and not just keeping it at the level of the panelists here talking, but inviting people in through Twitter, through other channels, through questions that may be posed in the Google Plus chat box, we turn these into really great learning opportunities that are inclusive rather than exclusive.
Thank you. And Raymond?
I think from the teaching aspect, I think we can continue to do a good job of making ourselves aware and keep implementing these ideas and sharing these ideas. However, it still comes back to the students' accountability. And I think a lot of times, I think Twitter can be an awesome platform. I think Facebook can be also a platform. I think a lot of these Snapchat, but I think it's what the person follows. A lot of times I see my students following, for lack of a better term, junk, and that's what's going to fill up their Twitter feed all day long is junk. But if you're, and I tell my students, if you're following something professional, if you're following something with some substance, that's what you're going to get back is substance and some information. So it's a fine line between technology and what you're following. So I think we have to be careful of, well, not careful, I think we just have to reiterate that, students, especially students, be aware of what you follow, the content of what you follow, because every platform could have a good purpose, but if you're following something that's not relevant to what you need, then it's not really relevant at all.
Yeah. Well, and just to...
Well, Raymond, it's very much...
Go ahead.
I was just going to jump in and say, Raymond, it's very much what Howard Rheingold calls crap detection and what many of us call digital literacy. It's part of what we have to keep fostering for ourselves, defining it better, and helping our learners to define it too. It's not going to have one-sentence descriptions that will nail the whole thing, because what makes us literate digitally changes from day to day, week to week, and month to month. It's a great challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And as following some of the Twitter feed as well, looking at ways that we can deliver across all of our platforms, but also, as we were already discussing, looking at getting past the platforms and just having whatever we deliver, not worrying about the platforms anymore, but just how can be, if it's a video, that it can be seen regardless of the platform, completely agnostic. Whatever it is that we're delivering, it's completely agnostic of what it is that we're viewing. If I've got a phone, if I've got a device, if I've got a Surface, if I've got a laptop, wherever I am, wherever I'm at, whatever I can just download, I can watch, I can do. On the flip side, when it comes to us as the instructors and where we create the content, and not to get into this whole conversation, we still are kind of tied to where we create our content, because it's very difficult to create the content on an iPad or an iPhone. I would not want to create an entire class's worth of content on a phone. That's a little difficult at this time. We're still kind of tied to a computer. At least we can maybe do some of this stuff on maybe a Windows Surface, some of those types of things. But it's not about us. It's about our students. It's about our patrons. It's about those we are giving our service to. But, when it comes to those we deliver to, making sure that they can get everything. Thank you. Fantastic conversation and answers. I think I've got time for probably one, maybe two more questions. I'll direct this to Paul first, because he was very interested in this topic. Where do MOOCs come into the online learning conversation for libraries? What are you seeing? Paul?
I'm seeing that they're still sort of on the fringes, and yet it's a very exciting fringe to be traveling. I don't agree with those people who thought massive open online courses were going to replace brick and mortar. I just never bought that concept, so I continue to see them as part of...
Oh, Paul froze. We lost Paul. Okay, so...
Big Brother got him.
Oh, no. They didn't want him to talk about the MOOCs.
Be careful.
Really, MOOCs are okay. Okay. So
Eyes are watching.
We'll go back to Paul. Oh, Paul, he's back. Paul,
I think he's back.
Can you hear?
You got to be careful.
Paul, are you with us?
Yes, apparently it wasn't an answer that was flying well with the internet.
I was going to say, Raymond just said that Big Brother got you. Yes, somebody did not like what you were saying about the MOOCs.
Yes, I would agree.
We're unhappy.
Big Brother being banned with, of course.
Exactly.
So to try to jump right back in where I was leaving, I think MOOCs are still on a fringe, but a very important fringe.
Yes.
There is the thing that everybody pays attention to, which are the X-MOOCs. You take a lecture, you tape it, you do quizzes, and at the end of it, you're gone. That doesn't intrigue me very much. What intrigues me is a much smaller group that takes us back to where the Canadian developers of MOOCs were in 2008, saying massive in terms of massive opportunity, collaborative and open in terms of learners being an integral part of the learning process, and the organizations that sponsor them facilitate conversations that last far longer than the predetermined time in which a class is going to exist. It's what I mentioned earlier with Michael Stevens' group, staying in touch with each other a year later. The educational technology media MOOC that I was in for a while, we're still together 2 years later learning together. These are dynamic opportunities, and there are plenty of things that are starting to bubble up, like New York Public Library saying, if you're in a MOOC in our area and you want to meet face-to-face to continue your studies, talk to us. We have space. Things like the ACRL report that came out, I think about 6 months ago, on open educational resources and MOOCs, full of opportunities for us to say, here are roles we can play within libraries to facilitate the development and the delivery and the continuance of MOOCs and communities of learning. It's not going to replace things. It's going to augment, and it's a very exciting form of augmentation.
Thank you. Rebecca.
Well, my first response would simply be that I think MOOCs are completely in line with library values in general. Libraries have always been about lifelong learning. Libraries have always been about democratizing access to education. And those are some of the things that I love about the conversation we've been having for the past couple of years now about MOOCs. My personal feeling about MOOCs and where we are with them is that we're in some sort of like evolutionary transitional stage. They may be like the missing link kind of thing. To something else, I'm not sure exactly what that looks like, but it's a transitional phase, and I agree with Paul. It's really exciting. There's a lot of really cool things going on. Some things that some things aren't working as well, some things are working well. We've had the opportunity to do research and get a sense of what works, and as Paul was just explaining, one of the things we found so far is that building community is a huge piece of what works and keeping people together in these online learning opportunities. So we know that that's going to be an essential piece in whatever the final evolutionary version of MOOCs turns out to be.
Sure, thank you. Raymond?
I like the fact, I mean, everybody already said it pretty much, but I mean, I like the fact that it is an alternative and a supplement, and who knows, you know, within the next 5 to 10 years, it might surpass or supersede. I hope not, but I hope it remains something relevant, and I hope it remains something worthy of people gaining access by using MOOCs, having the opportunity to learn and develop skills or get degrees in ways which we've never had before, earn their educational access. So and that only leads to better economy, because we're all for people maintaining and getting jobs and moving further in their careers on, because that helps the culture, it helps the economy. But I just want to make sure, and I hope that it's accessible to all and for all, and not just certain groups. So that's my main thing.
Thank you. Lauren?
So I sort of like Paul, always thought that we were being pretty literal when we were comparing it to college courses or whatever, and I never thought that was quite the right way to look at what MOOCs were doing. And I don't necessarily think of them, I mean, they're like any technology. I don't think they're inherently good or bad. It's a lot about how they're structured. Like I like to say that, and this is true for credit-bearing courses, but I think this could be true for MOOCs too, that the very best class I ever took was online. The very worst class I ever took was online. Right, it's what's done with it. So like the MOOCs themselves as a category, I have a hard time judging. It would be like saying classroom teaching is inherently good when we know there's plenty of bad classroom teaching.
It always boils back down to strong foundational instruction, regardless of how it's being delivered.
Exactly.
You can have fantastic online instruction, and you can have horrible face-to-face.
Exactly. So
a deficit with online instruction because we feel we're not face-to-face, but you can be face-to-face, and there can be some pretty crappy instruction.
I actually think that most people have a higher tolerance for bad face-to-face teaching because they've seen it their whole life, right? If the first time you take an online class you have a bad experience, you're like, oh, online is horrible. But if you just came from a bad lecture in a college course, you'd be like, yeah, they're boring, right? So like, I think that we get acclimated to bad classroom teaching sometimes, and online instructors don't have the luxury of that, which means, right, we are incentivized to do more intentional design. I'm also a little concerned about using the metrics of course completion with the MOOCs as the way to judge if they're valuable or not, because I've personally done a few MOOCs for like 2 weeks and gotten what I needed out of it, and then stopped because I got what I needed. So I don't know that we've yet found the right way to measure how useful or valuable the MOOC is. But one thing I wanted to make sure to mention while we're here is that a good friend of mine, Kyle Denlinger at Wake Forest, is doing MOOCs through the library for like alumni and parents of students and different communities that are related to the university. And I think it's a really interesting thing. If you wanted to look it up, it's under the title ZSRX. But they're doing these courses as a way to build community, a way to help parents feel connected to their students, a way to help alumni like build on the knowledge set that they had when they were students. And it's really interesting. They get good course completion, if that matters to you, right? And it's just a really interesting model, and to me a really interesting role for a library to play. As Rebecca's saying earlier, it aligns so much with our values, and it's a way of sort of helping rebrand what a librarian is to people who might not see a librarian in a day-to-day basis.
Okay, last question in 1 minute or less. Rebecca, where do you see online learning going in the next 3 to 5 years?
Ooh, okay, well this is going to sound kind of familiar to what I've already said. Oh, now I feel pressure, 1 minute. No, I think incorporating more about helping learners think about how they're learning, to think about how they're thinking, bringing in that metacognitive piece that completely aligns with what we're seeing in the directions of information literacy, particularly at the national level, and it aligns with a lot of the research that's going on out there. Right now we have an instructional learning community here in the library. We read a book together every semester. this semester we're reading Nicholas Carr's The Shallows, so we're thinking a lot about our own habits related to learning and reading and what we do online, and those conversations are really impacting the way we're thinking about how we can help our students think about their behaviors online and the way they learn.
Thank you. Raymond.
I don't know. I guess where do I see it going the next 3 to 5 years? Was that the question? Next 3 to 5 years?
That is.
Yeah. I think it'll be prosperous. I think even though I think statistics show, even though I can't give you those statistics and I shouldn't do that, but I think I was reading something recently that I think online courses were down, even though it was still higher than traditional courses.
Sure.
As far as attendance. But yeah, I think it's being prosperous. I think that again, it makes for individuals to have access to what they didn't have access to before. Mm-hmm. And I think that's huge, especially today and where we are in this economy and educational system, being that it could be the next housing bubble. I just think that, I like to use the term inframuralization. Inframuralization is doing more and more with less and less until you can do everything with nothing. And I think, online education is we're going that method. That's the route we're taking. And it's scary. But it's also, as Paul said, it's intriguing. It's engaging to know and to find out as you go along. However, jobs can be omitted and jobs can be obtained with the online learning, depending on how you look at it, depending on how big it gets. So, just be cognizant of where we are, where your place is as an individual. I would just make sure that you keep your skills toned and you keep your knowledge in depth, and I'll just say good luck. That's what I would say.
Okay, Paul.
Yeah, good luck is a great way to approach this. I'm among the first to admit that I'm terrible at making accurate prognostications. I'm in good stead because most of my great colleagues, most of the people I follow, are also equally bad at making good prognostications. What we face is so many possibilities of disruptive technology changing the way we do things. I think the way to approach this, rather than make prognostications that, because we're taping this today, we can prove that we were wrong about 2 or 3 years ago.
Oh, it's fine. I'm not really worried about being right or wrong. I just like to talk about it.
Yeah, I think rather than predicting, I'd like to be part of shaping that future that we're moving into. And for me, shaping that future means taking the best of what we see, taking the best of the developments that come along, and making engaging, effective online learning as well as face-to-face learning that serves the learner's needs, the organization's needs, and ultimately the people we don't talk about nearly enough, those people that are served by the people staffing libraries all over the world. That's where our real heart should be.
Thank you. And Lauren, finish us out today, please.
Well, I mean, like everyone, I think that we're all sort of in a similar headspace with this. I think I would just add that I believe this is going to be more and more expected by our students and more expected by our institutions that we're operating within. I do anticipate seeing more of a continuum and less of an online versus face-to-face, but more of a sort of blending across types of instruction, because students are going to expect some of this methodology no matter what type of class they're in. And as far as libraries go, I think that means we're also going to see a sort of blending from online learning to how we just do the services that are related to our work. So if you're going to create a new data service, there's going to be online learning that goes with that, and you'll need to figure out how to put that on the website and how to incorporate it. If you have like complicated printers or scanners in the building, you might need to figure out how to incorporate videos at that physical point of need. So I think I just continue to sort of focus on the idea that really what we're talking about is universal design, and how do we create content that helps learning no matter where our users are.
Thank you. Well, every time I do any presentation with the American Libraries Association or AL Live, the time just goes by so quickly. And I want to thank Rebecca and Raymond, Paul, and Lauren for taking the time to be on the panel today. And I'm going to turn this back over to Dan.
Thanks.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
And thank you all. Yeah, thank you all so much for joining us today, and thank you to our audience. And as always, we want to extend a special thanks to the IT staff at the Northwestern University Library for providing us with some help and support. And we hope we see you all for next month's episode.
And what's it focused on?
Next month, we are going to be talking about library futures in general. So,
talking
about the next 10, 15, 20 years of libraries. So, yeah, we'll be doing
calls on that.
Yeah, we'll be nothing but prognosticating. Have a great day, everyone.